Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the We Bought a Franchise podcast. I'm Jack Johnson.
I'm Jill Johnson.
And we have, for those of you out there thinking about becoming franchise owners, we have a very important guest today. We have Wade Milward from Rikor. Wade, welcome to the show. Wade, of course, Rikor is sort of a one-stop shop for all of a franchisee's and a franchisor's insurance needs, correct?
Yeah, no, appreciate you guys having me on here. Yeah, we typically get lumped into the insurance bucket, but we do focus exclusively on the franchising industry. So we work with over 100 franchise brands now and thousands of franchisees across the country in just the past few years, which has been really, really awesome to experience.
Yeah, Wade, we were so impressed. So Rikor, full disclosure, handles our insurance needs for our Pink's Window Services franchise. And of course, Wade, I've been seeing you for years on social media and we knew about you, but it was really cool to get like a firsthand sort of experience in working with you guys. And again, for all of you who may be tuning in for the first time, the purpose of this podcast is for Jill and I to share our experiences building and running our Pink's Window Services franchise. Full disclosure, we are franchise consultants. We do help people become franchise owners, but we thought it would be helpful to you as potential franchise investors to learn what it's like, the ups and downs of growing a franchise. And for us, it was great diversification. So, Wade, let's get into this a little bit. Maybe tell us about you and how you got started in the business and how Rikor helps people.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. If you've heard anybody talk that comes from the insurance industry, we all started the same way, either by family member or falling into it. Nobody wakes up one morning choosing to be an insurance agent. But I think I've heard the same thing in franchising too. I just fell into it, like that's kind of common. So I did the same thing. My grandfather started an agency back in like the 1940s. My dad was in it in the 1970s. So I started with the family agency, built up a sizable book of business, always focusing on small to mid-sized businesses. And then the way this whole thing started was actually one of my clients was a franchisee. This is back years ago in like 2018. And she was a large one. As a franchisee, she had 22 locations. She was doing $100 million in revenue. And she comes and asks me to solve her problem. Now, at the moment or at the time, I was not focusing on franchising. I was just building a book of small business insurance. And she wasn't small, she's mid. But so she asked me to solve some of her problems. And I do something, I create this thing, and she's all excited about it. She gets me in front of the brand president. Now, mind you, I have nothing at this point. I have a deck, right? Like a pitch deck and like a concept. So this is my first intro to franchising. I meet the brand president of a brand that had 900 locations. I'm clueless, guys. This is October 28th. So this is October 31st, it's Halloween day. And I get a call from her name's Heidi. 5 minutes prior to the meeting, she goes, "Hey, wait, are you ready?" I go, "Ready for what, Heidi?" She goes, "You're going to be meeting with the brand president." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" She goes, "You're pitching to him." I'm like, "Okay." And at the time, I'm wearing a inflatable unicorn costume. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, like, what am I?
That's amazing.
The whole thing is crazy. So I get on the call. I just start talking at the guy, right? I don't ask a single question. I don't know what I'm doing. And at the end of it, he says, "Interesting." And I'm like, oh, maybe I have something here. So I start doing more market research. And the second franchisor I meet technically is none other than Scott Abbott here in Utah. And I didn't know who Scott Abbott was either, right? So he was the prior founder of Five Star Painting, and then he now is the CEO of Five Star Franchising. And I go and sit down with him, and I'm talking to him, and he's like, "Wade, you got to build this thing, right? Like, there's a serious problem in the franchising space." And so I start building the thing a couple years later, and we start getting after it. And then somebody else that comes on board was Ryan Zink. So Ryan Zink jumps on, and he helps me out and opens up the door to all of these franchise brands. And sure enough, guys, the problem exists in every single franchise brand.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that we identified is franchisors have a terrible problem of tracking and monitoring insurance compliance across the entire franchise system. And franchisees are not getting either the level of education, the level of care, the level of service, and also just a simplified insurance purchasing experience that meets or exceeds the FDD requirements. And in addition to protects your guys' investment, you guys are investing hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we're like, yeah, figure out the insurance. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's all at stake. Like, it could all be crumbling down in a moment with one claim. So that's a long story how we got started.
Yeah, I mean, it's so valuable what you do because you're right. And what you do, look, in so many cases, franchise owners, especially in the first few years, we've got to go out there and we've got to sell and we've got to build. And so knowing that that piece is taken care of, speaking as a franchisee and as a client of yours, you guys have been very responsive to us and any of the questions that we've had. I mean, as we were getting fired up, we had questions about, how many stories can we go up and can we go on roofs? So one of the pivots we had to make was that we found out we couldn't put guys on roofs, right? So we had to go, and our needs here in South Florida we have a lot more requests for pressure washing. So it was cheaper for us to go out and just buy a big pressure washing rig and less liability than throwing guys up on the roof. So you guys have been so great in helping us to keep on track. And I'm actually getting emails from you guys. Hey, let's make sure that we're having a meeting to talk about your needs as you grow next year. So no, I can tell all of you out there who are thinking about becoming franchise owners, I'd be surprised at this point if whatever franchisor you're talking to isn't already working with Wade and his team, because they really do make it seamless from end to end.
Yeah. I mean, when you take on a new opportunity, there's a lot to get into, and it's new. And a lot of us, we're getting into a space that we're not used to. So to have that additional help and support is just like so helpful.
Well, I think just to kind of add on to what you guys are talking about, it takes two to tango, right? And so you guys being receptive to what we do is just as important. We have these conversations with all of our clients. And unfortunately, either it's misunderstood or they don't fully grasp the implications of not having the proper insurance. You guys can't believe, but like franchisees sometimes don't tell us if they're getting on roofs, or they want to avoid the conversation. People need to trust me, I know. And I cringe too. And I'm like, people need to realize that, like, if you don't tell the insurance company something, they'll just exclude it. They don't care. If somebody falls off a roof and you don't have the proper coverage, they don't care. If you're up on it and you're above 3 stories and all the general liability coverage is excluded, they don't care. It's like, and then they come back to us and they get frustrated, but we're trying to eliminate the friction. That's what we're doing. That's why we're trying to be so transparent with our franchisees. It's like, and sometimes we lose deals because of it, but I'd rather do the right thing and I'd rather provide the right coverage, even if it costs more, even if like we have to modify something, especially for first year franchisees, than getting into a position where you guys are left out with, paying for an uninsured claim. That's what terrifies me.
Yeah. I mean, and I think what you said two things that have sort of made me think on this episode. And the first thing you said was when you first went in to talk to that brand president and, talked about, hey, I was nervous, or it was my first time in that type of situation. So I just talked at the dude for an hour. Jill and I were having this conversation this morning because we had a client who he doesn't have the capital to do a full franchise with employees. So we've got to look at consultative businesses. And he's like, I'm scared to death of selling. I don't know how to sell. And I'm like, when I first started in my career, sales was all about who's got the best pitch and who can dazzle people. And now it's the opposite. People hate that. People want you to ask questions. People want to be heard. People want to be understood. And I would actually argue that people who are less salesy are much better salespeople now. I mean, we're on a podcast that's going to be watched on YouTube, right? Because people would rather, if they're going to look up, Rikor, they're going to want to come see you talk with us on YouTube. So I think authenticity and asking lots of questions, the world has really changed. It's no longer about just, throwing a massive pitch out there. So that really resonated with me. And then the second thing, so it is taking on a client that may not be the right fit. And that's the other side of this too. And I'm so happy you said that, because we're the same way. If someone is not a fit for franchise ownership, and we talk a lot about how hard it is. And I think the whole industry, you've probably seen it, has come around to responsible franchising. If it's not a fit, don't do it. If you don't have the right amount of capital, if you don't understand how hard this is going to be, or the things you need to do it right, don't do it.
Well, I mean, we could talk about both these things, but like setting clear expectations for potential franchisees is so critical. It's critical in your guys' space. It's critical in my space, right? It's also just as important, if not the most important, on the franchisor side. And so we have a lot of conversations with our franchisors about setting clear expectations. We do a deep dive into the FDD. We do what we call the FDD insurance analysis. It ends up being a 30 to 40 page report. And a lot of what I talk about is setting clear expectations from an insurance cost perspective too with franchisees. Often the item 7 is all out of whack. And so your item 7, when I talk about it, mostly I'm focusing on insurance, but really item 7 at scale for you guys is so important, because you get frustrated franchisees. You get franchisees that are extremely upset when they're told one thing. Oh yeah, it's going to cost $100,000. and they get in there, it's 200, it's 300, something totally different. And so we have this conversation. It's all about setting clear expectations and transparency. And like you said, it's just being authentic with them. Like, why are we hiding behind it? Like, let's get it all out in the air in the beginning. And then all of a sudden, like, yeah, it's so important. Just have the conversation. It's okay. So that's what we stress a lot. And then to your point too about the non-salesy thing, like when I first started this, I said to my sales guys, they're actually not even called sales guys. They're called consultants. So I changed the language because I didn't want them thinking that they're an agent selling insurance. Mm-hmm. They're actually consultants educating franchisees on proper insurance. So totally different nomenclature in my company. But I told them, like, your number one responsibility is to build meaningful relationships with these guys. Like, that's it. Insurance becomes a byproduct of everything else that we've done. Build the relationship, understand them, get excited. Like, these guys are entrepreneurs. They're investing in a business. This is cool stuff, like get to know them, get to know their family. So the result of that is absolutely insane. Our guys, if you're comparing us to an average insurance agency, our guys outperform the average producer 7 times. Our close ratio is X the national average, because to your point, Jack, we don't sell it. We just ask a lot of questions. And I do the same thing with franchisors. Like, what's your problem? Tell me more about it. What are you experiencing? What's the insurance process look like today? How are franchisees getting? And they just tell you everything. It's so simple.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really it. And, again, I agree with you on the item 7. And anytime we look at franchise investment, we throw the low side out the window. We say, whatever the high side is, that's what we're going to plan on. So I'm trying to put my sort of, someone who's listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, what's the number one question that a potential franchisee is going to want to know? And I think I probably know what it is, which is, Wade, what does a typical home services franchisee pay for insurance? What is it?
Yeah. And you already know my answer, which is going to be like, it depends. Mm-hmm. But what we have found, the average for, like, let's say it's a 2-year, maybe it's a first-year franchisee, it's probably in a decent range, especially if you have a vehicle, but it could be anywhere from $7,000 to $18,000 a year. And it's a big range depending on the home service. Like we have roofing clients, right, that are paying $18,000 or $20,000. So it's a little bit on the higher end exposure.
Sure.
And then we have guys that are doing fence installation, and it's probably $7,500 a year or $8,000. So it just kind of depends.
Yeah, I mean, it's here in Florida, like the cost to insure a vehicle has become silly. But when we do the analysis on it, we're like, okay, but one big job covers that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the high side of what you said, which is like a roofing franchise. We have a client that is a year and a half in on his roofing franchise, and the amount of business he does is insane. So roofing can do very big volume. Again, it's so worth it. It's such peace of mind because, man, again, you never know. Somebody falls off a roof, you better make sure you've got the coverage.
Yeah. And touching on like what you're talking about, this is kind of an interesting topic to think about when it comes to insurance. Is sometimes small business owners get stuck in the mindset of, there's a bunch of ways to make money, right? And one of the things that they think about is, I've got to reduce expenses. And so they look at insurance as this big expense, this line item, and they try to chip away at this thing, and they try to save maybe $1,000 a year, maybe tops $2,000 a year, depending on how much you're paying. And what we try to help these guys, and it's not about just saving it for ourselves, but it's like, don't you think the amount of effort taken to actually go through this process would be better spent improving processes or systems within the organization for operational efficiency, or going out and doing more sales calls to actually land larger deals? And let's just make sure the insurance is done right. We have to shift the perspective and the mindset of what insurance and how to actually, improve the business from, hey, let's chip away at this thing and spend all this time. I would actually argue it's wasting time, or improve the business, man. Go out there and land more deals.
I agree. I think that's a franchisee should be focused on growth, should be focused on cash flow. A franchisee that is going to witch hunt every little cost, I got to make sure Rikor isn't.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be in franchising. You honestly shouldn't. Franchise ownership is a team sport. It is. You got to trust that franchise that you signed up with is not trying to steal your money. Everybody wants to grow, wants you to grow and be successful.
Absolutely.
And part of this is, the beauty. I love working with a company like yours because I know you guys can take care of the whole thing for me. I'd so much rather focus on going out and closing that big commercial client than trying to save $2 here or there, with my insurance.
Yeah. 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 It's interesting how often that happens though. And it may be a cause of just the type of persona, the type of people that are becoming franchisees and entrepreneurs. This is all new to them, right? It's totally new world.
Mm-hmm.
So I totally understand that. And I totally get where they're coming from. But yeah, there's certainly things that you can spend your time on that's going to be way more productive with higher yield.
Well, I think you have more people becoming franchise owners than ever before. The barrier of entry is lower than it's ever been. And, again, not too long ago, when you say the word franchise, you're thinking about food, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're thinking about, expensive brick and mortar franchises that are 7-figure investments. And now people can become franchise owners for $150K, right? With home services. And so it's almost like flip flop to where over the last few years, real estate has become so expensive. So you can't buy a single family home, but you can buy a franchise. And so we're seeing younger entrepreneurs come into it. We're seeing many more people come into franchising.
Yep.
And so what happens now is that, you have a franchise that will sell 100 units in a year. When I was on the franchisor side, a good year was 20 units in a year. So it's almost like the maturation process of a franchise now has been truly consolidated to where you have so many people joining a brand in a given year, and then you have a certain amount that are going to transition out in a given year. And so you're speeding up that whole process now. It's a very interesting time in franchising.
As you were talking there, I wanted to kind of like put a plug in there for franchising. Being a business owner myself and going through the experience of being like a true startup with nothing. And anybody that's thinking about franchising, and we're talking about a little bit of franchisees that possibly have some resistance to the franchisor systems, process, procedures, vendors, suppliers, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Having an operating manual that's 400 pages with every single system built out. I cannot tell you guys that haven't started your own business yet how valuable or invaluable that is. Having done it myself and going through the pain of building those out, it requires a tremendous amount of effort. And that's why you see a lot of these successful franchise brands with corporate locations that have existed for decades before they start to franchise. And they become wildly successful because what they've done over the course of 30 years is like, hey, we perfected it finally. It took us 30 years though, or it took us 10 years. So anyways, anybody that's getting into franchise, follow the playbook. Like you said, they want you to be successful. Nobody wants you to fail. Your success is their success. And so like, I'm just coming from an entrepreneur's, like a founder side. It's like, it's a miserable experience. I don't wish it on anybody to start.
That's why we love what we do, because there's so many opportunities. And like you said, the franchisor wants you to succeed. They're not, they will do anything they can to help you. And so your feedback always helps them. They're learning along the way too. So usually a good franchisor is a bit open to kind of hearing your feedback, because you're in a market they don't know about yet, so there's that two-way conversation, which we're really fortunate to have with Pinks. Into us, being in a completely different location than their corporate, in Austin, Texas, and South Florida is very different, so having them listen to us and explain, even on the insurance side, it's a whole different ballgame in Florida than it is in Texas. It's important to have, their support, but also have them, reciprocate and listen to you as well. And you don't get that when you're doing it 100% by yourself. You're finding it all out, and you don't have that, backbone to help you. So I totally agree with what you're saying.
No, it's like the when you're doing it yourself, like Jill and I creating Franchise Insiders, when you make mistakes, they're expensive mistakes. And so having a franchisor to kind of keep you honest and show you where those potholes are is so invaluable. So you're right, having that system, but it takes a certain kind of entrepreneur. Yes. And that's, as franchise consultants, that's what we're here to do, is to kind of help flush that out. Are you truly a fit for franchise ownership?
Yeah.
Because we want both sides to be happy with the relationship.
Yeah. But I just want to talk about that too. Like making mistakes. Like I feel like all too often people are so fearful of making these mistakes now too. It's like people need to realize somebody said it best. Everybody's got shit. Like that to me summed everything up. And then I started to realize that I'm like, oh my gosh, like everybody makes mistakes. And so like, again, franchisees out there listening, people like thinking about business ownership and like wanting to get into it, it's okay. Like you can mess up And that's the great part about a franchise system is like, here's an operating manual, follow it. You're going to struggle. You're going to mess up too. And sometimes it's expensive, but it's okay because it's where you end up. Right. And like, I love that. Like thinking once I removed that barrier for myself as an entrepreneur and I got into it and I realized that everybody's going through something and nobody has it all buttoned up. Right. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not all tidy and perfect behind the scenes. We're all just figuring this thing out. And that's what I love about being an entrepreneur. It's like, let's just continue to improve one bit at a time every single day. Let's focus on the customer. How do we respond better? How do we answer their questions before they ask them? How do we serve you guys better? How do we become more transparent? It's very, very simple.
Yeah, it's like we were in Orlando last week going to Disney. And of course I always miss, the first, it says go left here and I miss it. Okay, go left here, miss it, go left here. The GPS will help you find your way. And I think a franchise, that's one of the great things about a franchise is you're right. They will, even if you make a wrong turn, which inevitably all of us do.
We all do.
They'll help you get on track. And I think what you just said there is really cool. It's like, don't put that much pressure on yourself. Okay. Yeah. We're all human. We all make mistakes and we all can recover. And I think so much of this as franchise owners is us realizing it's like we were just talking about, we do sort of these updates where we have guests like yourself, but also episodes where just Jill and I kind of talk about what's going on with Pinks. And it was the middle of summer and South Florida, we lose a lot of our population, right? They go back up to New York. It's really hot here. And so business was really slow for us in the middle of summer. And, a lot of people might've been really freaked out about that and said, oh my God, but we stayed the course. We believed, we followed the franchisor's guidance. We still continued to spend more than less on advertising. So they'd say, spend this on advertising and we spent more. And I'm happy to say that the last 2 months, we've been the leading franchisee in terms of billings. And that's not us trying to at all, rub it in anyone else's faces.
No.
It's just us being proud of growing the business.
Absolutely.
But yeah, as a franchise owner, you will get tons of support. You will get tons of training. But ultimately, just like when you go to call Wade and his team and say, what things should I have here? If we're taking on this new big job, do we need to change our coverage? It's ultimately up to you to quarterback the business and hire the right people and grow and be growth minded.
Yeah. I'm so curious about this because that's a certain type of mindset that you guys have adopted, right? That allowed you to persevere despite all the challenges, despite the fact that you guys saw a dip in revenue. And the typical response is shrink, reduce, right? So like, what do you think it was for you guys? Like, why do you have that mindset?
Well, Jill and I are very fortunate in that our fathers were entrepreneurs before us. And my dad, I'll never forget, my dad said to me, when business is slow, double down on advertising.
I love it.
And there have been times where I said to Jill, maybe we should cut back. She's like, no, remember what your dad said.
You always have to remind yourself. And yes, we've gone through it. We've seen it. We've seen those ups and downs and how you can really come out of those down periods. And I always actually say to Jack, I think when we hit a down period in any of our businesses is when he does his best work.
Oh my gosh.
I'm probably more of a panicker. I mean, you are too, but it really kind of gets you thinking, because it's really easy to just kind of, go with the flow and say things are great and, just stay there. But when you're presented with a challenge, I think that's when you start to do some of your best work and come up with brand new ideas and, look at it. And then once that happens once or twice, it kind of helps you in the future saying, okay, we're at that point, this is the point where we need to do something different and we know we can get out of it. And so I agree. I don't think a lot of people think that. Sometimes you have to go through it once or twice or 100 times. But that's so important for any entrepreneur, to not let those things take you down.
Yeah. I mean, we heard recently about a franchisee who decided not to follow the franchisor's guidance on advertising, decided to do exactly the opposite, and it didn't work out so well for him. So yeah, I would always say when business is slow, you've got to get your brand out there. That's when you've got to go to work and do your best work.
Something I was going to say that you guys it's a quote that I love, and it's necessity is the mother of innovation. And oftentimes when we're going through these periods of difficulty, of challenges, like you talked about, Jill, it forces you to innovate. It forces you to think differently. And so there's this really interesting fine line that we have to toe as entrepreneurs and business owners is it can't always be blue skies and, rainbows all the time. Sometimes it almost needs to be difficult. So we are forced to do things differently. I love going through and kind of thinking back through the history of my business now and seeing these inflection points that I hit. And inflection points for me is very, very simple. I measure them at like revenue size. And so each time you hit this inflection point, all of a sudden you're like, oh, everything just broke because I hit this certain point. And then what it does is it forces me and my team to go back and like rethink everything we've done. This has been an incredible year of building out a lot of foundation, building out a lot of systems and operating procedures and everything. And something that we experienced, which I think is incredible, is we experienced double growth, same head count, which is almost radical. Like, it's like, what? Like, how is that possible? But it's like, that's what, again, the beauty of a franchise is like, here's all the systems. If you just use the systems and implement the systems, it's all in there so you can be super, super efficient in your organization. And so going back to like generating revenue or building a business multiple ways, it's like, hey, you could increase revenue, but what are their other goals in mind? Are we actually increasing revenue while maintaining expenses or decreasing expenses to improve margin and net profitability? Like, we're going well beyond insurance right now, but I just love entrepreneurship, right? That's what we're talking about. This is the audience. Like, this is what business ownership is all about. Building a business to be able to scale, and like getting out of you guys. I don't know the specifics, and I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say anything, but you bought more than one territory, right?
Yeah, 5.
Yeah. 5 territories. I went to something recently and I was this person was up there talking about multi-unit ownership. She is in the restaurant space, but it's the same principle. And what I like about this is like a lot of franchisees get into this thinking that they're going to be an owner operator. I'm like, that's great, but that's not how wealth is created.
Right.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And it's a real fine line to walk. And what I mean by that is Jill and I could do 5 units because Franchise Insiders paid for it. We had the first business pay for the second. When we started Franchise Insiders, we had nothing. We had to sell our house. We're talking about this a lot because we're coming out with a book. And so we had to kind of go back and kind of relive what got us started. And we were so fed up with corporate America that we said, sell the house, burn the boats, let's go. Throw every bit of cash we have into Franchise Insiders. And then we didn't even make any money for the first 5 months we were open. But I never remember being scared.
Yes.
We knew we were going to be good at it. We had a feeling, we had the confidence. So we started with one business. And so when we coach new potential franchise owners, a lot of times they're going to say, hey, I want to own 10 units. I want to be a big entrepreneur and this and that. And to me, it feels a lot like when I go to the buffet. I want the prime rib. I want the brisket. I want the everything. And then I sit down and 5 minutes later, I'm like, I should not have done that.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, and Wade, you're exactly right. If you want to go next level on wealth as a franchise owner, you need multi-units, but we all are kind of in this period of where we want it to do everything right away. And that can be a negative for franchisees, especially if they put too much money of their working capital into franchise units. So we are now counseling first time franchisees. Really, you don't have to do all those units. Less is more.
But I think making it a goal is important.
Yeah, right.
So you don't, okay, you can get to all the things at the buffet, just don't get them all at once,
correct.
Work your way up to it. And I think that's really important. So you don't, take on too much.
Yes.
But have that as a goal because yes, if you really want to build that wealth, you do need multiple.
Well, and the truth of the matter is, and this is not a secret, not everyone's going to be a franchise owner forever. So you may start with one territory and you may have a neighbor, which by the way, a neighbor franchisee is a great thing, but it may not be right for the neighbor. And 2 years later, the neighbor's like, you know what, this doesn't work for my lifestyle. I want to sell the business. And you might pick up that same territory you wanted for pennies on the dollar. And a lot of the work's been done. You can just take over the lease. And so that's where we say, if you're going to be a good franchise owner, you will find your way to more units. You will find a way to scale, but don't take all your capital and put it into units.
Yeah. Now, you don't want to chew off too much in the very beginning, right? Like that's not the idea behind it. But I think like what Jill's talking about is establishing the goal. It's helping people see something that they cannot see. Now, often entrepreneurs see the potential in other people before that person sees the potential in themselves. And I think that's where you guys exist as the guide, right, to the hero. The hero is the franchisee. The hero is the investor. You guys are simply helping them, guide them along the way to this path of entrepreneurship. But often we are blinded because of challenges and obstacles. And it's hard. We limit ourselves to what our full potential is. They need the guide, the sidekick to pull them up every once in a while and say, dude, you could do more. You got this. Like start with the one, start with the two, but like all of a sudden you hit these inflection points, you're building your business and you're doing all the operations. You're like, dude, I just hit $1 million in revenue. It's like, well, what's next?
Right.
And it's not about the wealth so much. And it's not about how do we define success, right? But often the way I define success is what is your potential? What are you capable of? And all of a sudden you start thinking that way and you're like, oh my gosh, I can do more. And it's not about making more money. It really isn't. It's about what you're capable of doing. And that's to me, what gets me motivated and gets me excited is like, do we want to help 1,000 franchisors? That's 30% of the industry.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like that's a big vision, but why not? And why can't franchisees have a big vision too, as they get into it, right? Understand it. But I didn't have that vision in the very beginning. It didn't start off, I'm gonna, you know, it's evolved for sure.
No one does, you know, and it's a different mindset. It's like for Jill and I to take on all those units, and then of course we've got more staff than other, you know, an owner operator franchisee does. But Jill and I aren't looking at this like Pinks isn't going to make. It's a real 5-year project for us, and the goal for us was to say in 5 years it'd be great if Pinks could replace what we make as Franchise Insiders, because Franchise Insiders is a great business, but it's all me and Jill. Whereas Pinks is out there doing jobs right now without me and Jill.
Making money. I love it.
And so that's, for us, it's a long-term mindset. So when people call me and say, hey, are you profitable on your Pinks yet? I'm like, dude, that's not my mindset.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm pumping money into it because I want to grow it to be, you know, a big multi-million-dollar business.
Yeah. I was in the red for 2.5 years. And so you talk about like going into it and being confident. The reason I got my confidence is because of my wife's. In the beginning, I think it was like 2018, and I wanted to start this. And I was the guy with a million ideas. I still am a guy with a million ideas, but I've learned to focus, right? Thank you. We can commiserate together. It's very difficult. But I had a great wife, and you do too, obviously. She's like, hey, she's like
the star of the show. Come on.
My gosh, I couldn't do what I'm doing without her. So she goes, you're not ready. 18. And I'm like, what are you talking about? To me, it was like a big blow. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm offended, right? And she goes, why don't you just focus on one thing? And I'm like, oh my gosh. She goes, if you just do the one thing, you'll be a lot better off. So I did the one thing for 1.5 years, and I saw it through. And then finally this thing came up again in 2020. I'm like, I got to do this. And at the time I was, you know, really bad experience with my family agency. I couldn't work with my dad and my 2 brothers anymore. And it just was this massive falling out. I'm like, I got to do the one thing. She goes, you're ready. I'm like, oh my gosh, like the confidence. Oh my, like I could do this now. And so again, speaking to franchisees, this is actually direct. This is not just a story about me, but this is applicable to you guys. It's like, have the support of your spouse, right? Or your significant other, whoever is there next to you. The moment they say that, you're like, oh, I can do anything. I got this. So I think that's super important for anybody getting into business ownership. To your point, you're going to go through rough patches. I didn't pay myself for 6 months. I went from a good living after building a book of business for 12 years to zero. You know what I'm saying? Like you guys get it.
We were there. Of all things, so I'm reading a book by Alex Van Halen on the whole Van Halen story. And it's weird for me to bring this up in a business setting, but he said something in the book. I was reading it last night. They're 7 years in. They're at the time, and I remember I was like in 4th grade. They're the biggest band on earth. He's like, people thought we were like these millionaires. He's like, but by the time you pay the record company, all that stuff, he's like, we were making no money. He's like, it wasn't until we were about 10 years in that we really started to make money. But he's like, we kept investing. And I never would think about this in terms of a rock star, but he's like, we would invest in a great stage show. We wanted people to have a great experience. We would invest in this. We would invest in that. It's a business.
It's a business.
And I'm like, here's this rock band that I imagined at the time that these guys are living in mansions in their. He's like, we actually didn't start to make any. We were living in our parents' house for the first 3 years and we were these big global rock stars. Wow. And it just struck me that every business, people need to be patient those first few. And I know it's hard to hear this, but you've got to be patient those first few years, because you're 6 months in and you're like, holy smokes, this is hard. I want to quit. And you can't quit. You've got to keep going.
Yeah. And that's why having that vision is your why, right? Having that why is so important. And there's an argument with entrepreneurship of being disciplined or having a why. And some people talk about the discipline, and you're going to persevere no matter what, because you're disciplined. You wake up, you do the things. And I'm like, I get that, but honestly, like I'm very disciplined. I do my thing. I have a very typical routine. It's very, whatever, it's all dialed in. But for me, if I didn't have my why, I don't care how disciplined I was, like I would have stopped. You know, like I just, it was too painful and I would have stopped. And so I think it requires both. Get the discipline, build good habits, read Atomic Habits. That's obviously a very popular book. It's incredible. And then make sure, then go read Start With Why, right? Simon Sinek. So it's like having both is very, very powerful.
I think that's great. Wade, this has been awesome. And I feel like we could go on and on and on with you for hours. You're a real easy guy to talk to and very motivational. If there's someone out there who's listening, who's interested in, just finding out more about your services, how can they contact you? Where can they find you guys?
What's the protectmyfranchise.com?
Love it. Yeah, and for those of you, of course, that want to contact us, text 305-710-0050. I mean, I can tell all of you that Wade and his company have been a tremendous asset to us as franchise owners. And again, what's the saying? It takes a village. I mean, having great support systems is tremendous. Wade, anything else you want to say to the folks that we haven't?
Dive in. Just do it. Stop waiting. Stop thinking about it. Just make it happen. Pull the trigger. Corporate America is the worst.
It really is. I mean, I feel like it raised us all, but
it's simple things. Evil. It's like little things. Like 2 weeks ago, we're sitting there at a tree lighting with our son, and we're like, "Let's go to Disney this week." We don't have to call anyone. Like that may seem like the smallest thing on earth to someone else, but to us, the fact that we can book the hotel, we're gone, or like we don't have to answer to anyone but ourselves. And that freedom.
Our son's school, but that's a whole other thing.
I always get like the text messages.
Education is important. That's our only
sure. Yes, education, of course.
Awesome.
I appreciate it.
All right, Wade, thank you so much. It's been great having you on, sir. Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Take care.